Step back in time 300 million years ago into a world where the air was thicker, the forests darker, and the ground alive with strange sounds. Towering club mosses and giant ferns formed green cathedrals above, their trunks dripping with moisture. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a hawk's darted overhead, their buzzing loud enough to rattle the leaves. But the true master of these ancient forests was not in the skies. It crawled across the forest floor. Out from the undergrowth, pushing aside rotting fronds, comes a creature that seems more like a machine than an insect. Its body stretches more than 8 feet, armored with overlapping plates like shields of polished stone. Hundreds of legs rise and fall in unison, scraping across the damp earth with a relentless rhythm. This was Arthropleura, the giant millipede of the Carboniferous, a creature so alien in scale and presence that even imagining it today feels surreal. Unlike modern centipedes and millipedes that slip away unnoticed, Arthropleura could not be ignored. It moved like a living conveyor, its armored body glinting under shafts of ancient sunlight. To the tiny amphibians and invertebrates that scurried in its path, it was less a creature and more a moving wall of plates and legs. The forest bent to its presence. When Arthropleura advanced, others simply fled. The Carboniferous world was a crucible of gigantism. Oxygen levels soared higher than at any other time in Earth's history, fueling oversized insects, amphibians, and arthropods. Arthropleura thrived in this environment, its very size a product of a planet unlike the one we know today. But while its appearance suggests terror, its true nature remains debated. Was it a predator, snapping up small animals, or a leaf shredder, feasting on decaying vegetation? Its fossils whisper but do not shout, leaving room for both science and imagination. One thing is certain, Arthropleura shattered expectations of what an invertebrate could become. It was a symbol of a stranger Earth, a reminder that evolution often takes forms that challenge our sense of the possible. To step into the Carboniferous forest was to step into Arthropleura's domain, a place where centipedes ruled like dragons. Welcome to ancient beast behavior. This is the story of Arthropleura, the 8-foot centipede that terrified the Carboniferous. 300 million years ago, the Earth was wrapped in a world that feels almost alien to us today. The continents sat close to the equator, blanketed in endless swamps, where trees towered without flowers, fruits, or even proper leaves. Instead, forests were built from colossal club mosses, giant horsetails, and fern-like plants that rose like pillars in a vast green cathedral. The air itself was different, thick, heavy, and rich with oxygen. Levels soared as high as 35%, far higher than the 21% we breathe now. This oxygen surplus was a gift to arthropods and insects, whose bodies could grow to immense sizes without suffocating under their own weight. Creatures that seem impossible today thrived in this supercharged atmosphere. Above the swamps, dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a modern hawk patrolled the canopy. Their buzzing was not the soft hum of garden insects, but a roar that echoed through the trees. Giant cockroaches scuttled across decaying wood, while strange amphibians lurked in every pool, some no larger than a mouse, others swelling to the size of crocodiles. The ground was never silent. The forest floor was a patchwork of mud, roots, and fallen leaves, always wet, always in decay. Steam rose from stagnant pools, filling the air with a smell of rot and life. Every step stirred beetles, millipedes, and crickets that vanished into the undergrowth as quickly as they appeared. It was in this strange and fertile world that Arthropleura reigned. Moving like a living train across the leaf litter, it carved pathways through the swamp with its sheer bulk. To the small creatures of the Carboniferous, it must have seemed less like an insect and more like part of the land itself come alive. The Carboniferous was not just a cradle of giant life. It was the beginning of something greater. Here, the first reptiles laid their eggs on land, breaking free from water's grip. Here, coal forests locked away carbon in massive layers of peat, reshaping the planet's climate for millions of years. But amid all this change, Arthropleura became one of the undisputed rulers of the ground. The world of the Carboniferous was a paradox. Lush yet suffocating, fertile yet treacherous. It was a place where life experimented on a grand scale, pushing size and form to extremes. And out of this experiment emerged a crawling giant, the armored centipede that terrified the ancient swamps, Arthropleura. At first glance, Arthropleura was less an insect and more a living fortress. Its body stretched up to 2.5 meters, over 8 feet, longer than most humans, and armored like a mobile tank. To see it moving through the Carboniferous swamp would have been like watching a train of plates glide over the forest floor, each segment rippling in precise rhythm. The creature's body was divided into dozens of hardened plates called tergites, each overlapping the next. These gave Arthropleura an appearance of unyielding strength, as if evolution had forged a shield wall and given it legs. Yet the plates were not rigid like stone. They were jointed, flexible, and allowed the animal to twist and bend as it pushed through dense vegetation. Each segment sprouted a pair of legs, meaning Arthropleura carried hundreds of limbs beneath its armored back. Imagine the sound of those legs, a scratchy, rustling rhythm that would grow louder as the animal approached, like a drumbeat of claws on wet earth. To smaller creatures, that sound alone would have been enough to send them scurrying into hiding. The armor was more than protection. It was a visual display of dominance. Fossil impressions show broad, flattened plates with subtle ridges, giving the animal a corrugated appearance. Sunlight filtering through the canopy might have reflected off these ridges, making Arthropleura's approach shimmer like the glint of a moving blade. Its sheer bulk was staggering. Scientists estimate that a fully grown Arthropleura could weigh more than 50 kilograms, a mass almost unthinkable for a land-dwelling arthropod. Standing beside it, a human's chest would barely rise above its armored back. The scale alone made it one of the most imposing invertebrates in Earth's history. But what of its head? Here the fossil record grows quiet. Complete heads of Arthropleura have not been found, leaving its feeding habits a puzzle. Some paleontologists believe it possessed strong mandibles capable of shredding vegetation, while others speculate about predatory behavior, grasping smaller animals in powerful jaws. Its mouthparts may have resembled those of modern millipedes or centipedes, equipped with mandibles for tearing. If so, they were likely hidden beneath a broad armored plate, giving the head a blunt, shield-like appearance. This only adds to the aura of mystery. What did those jaws truly do? And what sounds did they make when they closed on food? Arthropleura's underbelly told another story. Soft tissues rarely fossilize, but impressions suggest a segmented belly with room for massive muscles to drive hundreds of legs in coordination. This powerful engine of movement meant Arthropleura could push through mud, over roots, and across uneven ground without slowing. Its design was not built for speed, but for inevitability. When Arthropleura moved, it advanced like a rolling wall of armor and legs, too large to be stopped by roots, too strong to be challenged by most rivals. It did not chase so much as occupy, claiming ground with every step. Even the texture of its exoskeleton remains debated. Some reconstructions imagine it smooth and glossy, like the carapace of a beetle. Others suggest a rough, ridged surface, more like bark than shell, which would have helped it blend into the forest litter. Either way, its body would have been a blend of strength and camouflage. This combination of traits, massive size, armored plates, endless legs, made Arthropleura both terrifying and unforgettable. It was less like any modern insect and more like a relic of an alien world. To stand in its shadow was to confront the limits of what evolution can build when oxygen and time give it freedom. Arthropleura was not just big for an invertebrate, it was the largest land arthropod to ever walk the earth, a record that still stands today. And in its very anatomy, in every armored plate and jointed limb, was written the story of why it became the undisputed ruler of the Carboniferous forest floor. To imagine how Arthropleura behaved is to imagine a creature both familiar and alien. At its core, it was an arthropod, driven by simple instincts: move, feed, survive. Yet its scale turned those instincts into something extraordinary, creating an animal that reshaped the world around it with every step. Movement was its most defining trait. With hundreds of legs working in synchronized waves, Arthropleura advanced steadily across the swampy ground. Unlike a sprinting predator, it did not move with bursts of speed, but with a slow, relentless inevitability, more like a river carving through earth than an animal crossing a forest. The coordination required to move such a body must have been immense. Each segment had to rise and fall in sequence, the wave of legs rolling forward like ripples across water. To an observer, this motion would have looked hypnotic, a rippling train of armor gliding silently yet powerfully through the undergrowth. Diet remains one of the greatest mysteries. Many scientists argue that Arthropleura was a herbivore, feeding on decaying vegetation, fallen leaves, and rotting wood that littered the Carboniferous floor. Its sheer size would have required vast amounts of plant matter, and the swampy forests provided an endless buffet of ferns and club moss debris. Others suggest a more ominous possibility, that Arthropleura may have been at least partly omnivorous, snapping up smaller animals when the chance arose. Its armored body and imposing bulk gave it the confidence to dominate feeding grounds, whether tearing through leaves or disturbing amphibians hiding in the muck. If Arthropleura was herbivorous, it was not harmless. Imagine a living bulldozer moving across the forest floor, stripping layers of decaying plant matter and leaving churned mud in its wake. The passage of such a giant would have reshaped its environment, opening trails through the dense litter where smaller creatures could follow. Resting behavior remains speculative, but its armor suggests it could remain exposed even when still. Unlike soft-bodied millipedes today that hide beneath logs, Arthropleura may have rested openly, its sheer size and plating a deterrent against attack. For the amphibians and early reptiles nearby, sharing ground with Arthropleura meant living in its shadow. Communication is another puzzle. Did it drum its legs against the ground, creating vibrations to signal others? Fossil trackways show multiple individuals moving together, though whether this was coincidence or true social behavior remains unknown. If it traveled in groups, the sight of several Arthropleura moving side by side would have been nothing short of apocalyptic. Its lifestyle was tied intimately to the Carboniferous environment. The high oxygen atmosphere allowed its body to function at massive size, but also meant it thrived only in swampy, humid ecosystems. Dry conditions may have been fatal, making Arthropleura a creature of shadows and mist, always bound to the wet heart of the forest. Predation, if it occurred at all, was likely opportunistic. Rather than chasing prey, Arthropleura may have used its size to corner small amphibians or insects, crushing them beneath its plates or snapping them up with hidden mandibles. To those smaller animals, even a casual step from Arthropleura meant instant death. Its behavior, whether peaceful or ruthless, always carried the weight of dominance. In a forest where most creatures were fragile and small, Arthropleura's bulk alone shaped the balance of life. It was less an active hunter than a living force of inevitability, its very presence rewriting the rules of survival on the Carboniferous floor. Every track it left in the mud was a reminder of its power. Fossilized pathways, some several feet wide, tell us it moved with purpose, carving through landscapes as if the world belonged to it. And in truth, for millions of years, it did. For a creature as massive as Arthropleura, few animals dared to challenge it. In the Carboniferous forests, size was everything, and Arthropleura carried more size than any other land arthropod in history. It moved like a juggernaut, armored, relentless, and for most small creatures, simply untouchable. Yet even giants have vulnerabilities. While Arthropleura's armor offered protection from direct attack, its soft underside was exposed if flipped. Smaller predators could not exploit this, but larger amphibians, some stretching nearly as long as crocodiles, may have tested its defenses. The swamp was never free from hungry eyes. One potential rival was Anthracosaurus, a massive predatory amphibian with crocodile-like jaws. Lurking in rivers and forest pools, it could ambush anything that came too close to the water's edge. If an Arthropleura ventured near a swampy channel, its legs rippling into the shallows, it may have faced a sudden strike from below. Another threat came not from animals, but from the environment itself. Arthropleura's vast body required constant moisture, and drying conditions could be lethal. Prolonged droughts would have left it stranded, armor baking in the sun, while opportunistic scavengers circled. In this way, the climate was both its cradle and its executioner. Rival arthropods, though smaller, may have challenged Arthropleura for resources. Giant dragonflies like Meganeura were aerial hunters, ruling the skies, while cockroach-like insects swarmed the forest floor. These creatures did not prey upon Arthropleura, but they competed for food and space, shaping its world through constant rivalry. The young of Arthropleura were likely more vulnerable. Smaller and less armored, juveniles may have fallen prey to amphibians, reptiles, or even large invertebrates. Fossil records rarely preserve these stages, but it is hard to imagine that every hatchling survived in a world filled with predators waiting for weakness. Despite these risks, a fully grown Arthropleura was almost beyond challenge. No predator of its era could reliably overpower it on land. Its bulk, armor, and sheer presence made it more dangerous to attack than to avoid. In most cases, survival for other animals meant keeping out of its path. Even so, fear alone may have served as its greatest defense. Imagine a wall of plates and legs advancing slowly, dozens of claws scratching the earth in unison. The sound, the vibration, the shimmer of its armored body in dim swamp light. It was enough to scatter smaller creatures before conflict even began. Yet dominance does not mean invulnerability. Over time, the very world that made Arthropleura possible, the high oxygen, the lush swamps, would also change. Rivals would evolve, ecosystems would shift, and threats greater than any single predator would eventually rise to challenge its reign. For now, though, in the heart of the Carboniferous, Arthropleura walked almost unopposed. It was the closest thing the ancient swamps had to a living ruler, untouchable, unavoidable, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat is not another animal, but the fragility of the environment itself. The question of what Arthropleura ate has lingered in paleontology for over a century. Fossils of its armored body survive, but the mouthparts that would reveal its diet remain elusive. Without jaws to study, scientists are left to reconstruct its feeding habits from indirect clues, its size, its environment, and the traces it left behind. The most widely accepted view is that Arthropleura was a herbivore, a gentle giant of the Carboniferous swamps. It likely fed on the fallen litter of the forest, ferns, mosses, and rotting plant matter that piled thickly across the swampy ground. Imagine its armored body moving slowly through a tangle of roots, pausing to lower its head and strip a mat of decaying leaves into its hidden mouth. The Carboniferous was a world of abundance for plant eaters. Giant club mosses and horsetails shed endless debris, carpeting the ground in soft, damp layers. Arthropleura, with its armored bulk and endless legs, could roam across this feast with little fear of interruption. Every step may have brought its mandibles to fresh meals, a conveyor of plates and legs harvesting the forest floor. Yet not all agree. Some paleontologists propose that Arthropleura was an omnivore, taking advantage of both plants and small animals. Its size alone made it an intimidating competitor at feeding grounds. If amphibians or smaller invertebrates crossed its path, it may have snapped them up opportunistically, turning from a leaf shredder to a predator in an instant. Evidence for this view comes from the fossilized trackways Arthropleura left behind. These tracks sometimes veer toward swamps where amphibians gathered, suggesting it may have sought more than just vegetation. The truth may lie in flexibility. A creature so large could not afford to be picky, and survival meant taking whatever food was available. If it was an omnivore, its feeding style may have resembled that of modern omnivores like wild boars, digging, tearing, and consuming with ruthless efficiency. A small amphibian caught beneath its armored legs might have been crushed by accident, only to be consumed as part of the forest's endless cycle. For smaller creatures, Arthropleura was both bulldozer and executioner. The absence of direct fossil evidence leaves its diet in shadow, but the impact of its feeding is clear. By consuming massive amounts of decaying vegetation, Arthropleura likely helped shape the forest ecosystem. It recycled nutrients back into the soil, clearing pathways through dense litter where smaller animals could follow. In this way, its role was as much ecological as it was biological. The Carboniferous forests may have echoed with its presence as it stripped away leaf mats and stirred the damp soil. The sound of plates scraping and mandibles tearing filled the swamp. For millions of years, this rhythm became part of the forest's pulse, a reminder that the floor itself could rise up and feed. Whether herbivore or omnivore, Arthropleura's diet was inseparable from its size. To fuel its massive body, it needed constant intake, perhaps eating for hours each day. Its slow, steady crawl was not just movement. It was survival in motion, a living engine converting the swamp's abundance into strength and endurance. Its feeding reminds us of an essential truth. Not all monsters are defined by predation. Arthropleura's terror lay not in fangs or speed, but in scale. It fed with the inevitability of time, stripping forests as it moved. A giant whose hunger was as relentless as its march. For a creature as massive as Arthropleura, the fossil record is surprisingly scarce. Unlike the hard bones of vertebrates, arthropod exoskeletons decompose quickly, leaving only fragments behind. What we know of Arthropleura comes mostly from impressions in stone and the rare remains of its armored plates. Each discovery is a puzzle piece, hinting at the giant that once crawled through the Carboniferous swamps. The most striking fossils are the trackways, long trails pressed into ancient mud, preserved as stone. Some stretch more than 3 feet across, wide enough to make even seasoned paleontologists stop and stare. Each track shows the rhythmic placement of dozens of legs, rising and falling in perfect sequence. To follow such a track is to walk in the footsteps of a giant that moved like a living wave. These trackways tell us more than just size. Their depth reveals the sheer weight of the animal, pressing deeply into the mud as it advanced. The width of the trail shows how broad its armored back must have been. A moving wall nearly as wide as a human is tall. In some trackways, the edges ripple outward, as if the ground itself recoiled at its passing. Some fossils show tracks that run side by side, suggesting that multiple Arthropleura traveled together. Was this coincidence, a cluster of giants crossing the same path at different times? Or did it hint at social behavior? Groups of these colossal arthropods moving in silent convoys through the forest? The debate continues, but the imagery remains haunting. Fragments of its exoskeleton have also been found, broad, plate-like structures that once locked together along its back. These fragments are massive compared to modern arthropod remains, some as large as a human hand. They confirm that Arthropleura's armor was not imagination but fact, proof of an invertebrate built like a fortress. Perhaps the most dramatic fossil discoveries come from Scotland and Germany, where enormous trackways stretch across slabs of ancient rock. In one case, the impressions are so well preserved that individual claw marks from its legs can still be seen, frozen in time for 300 million years. Standing before such a fossil, one cannot help but feel the echo of its power. Yet for all these clues, much remains hidden. No complete head of Arthropleura has ever been found, leaving its feeding habits unresolved. Its mouthparts, eyes, and even the fine details of its antennae are lost to time. We see only the trail it left, the imprint of its armor, and the shadow of its passing. These gaps fuel imagination as much as science. Was Arthropleura a gentle herbivore crawling through forests like a living log, or a secret predator lurking beneath its plates? Fossils cannot answer these questions fully, but they preserve the silence of its march, the undeniable truth that such a giant once ruled the land. The fossil record of Arthropleura is a reminder of both fragility and resilience. Fragility, because so little of its body has endured. Resilience, because even fragments of armor and trails in stone are enough to shake our understanding of what life on Earth can become. Every track, every plate, every impression is a message across millions of years. Together, they tell us not only that Arthropleura existed, but that it dominated, leaving behind scars in the land that would one day become our window into a forgotten age. The Carboniferous forests were not just backdrops, they were living systems, and Arthropleura played a central role within them. Imagine a swamp floor layered with decaying plants, ferns collapsing into rot, and moss spreading like a carpet. Into this chaos crawled Arthropleura, its armored body grinding slowly across the litter, reshaping the landscape with every step. As a primary consumer, Arthropleura likely fed on rotting vegetation and dead plant matter, recycling nutrients back into the soil. By stripping leaf litter and breaking it into smaller pieces, it accelerated decomposition, making it easier for fungi and microbes to process. In this way, Arthropleura acted as both consumer and engineer, keeping the forest floor in balance. Its sheer bulk created physical impact as well. Trails carved by its endless legs became corridors that smaller animals could use. Amphibians, insects, and juvenile reptiles may have followed in its wake, taking advantage of the cleared pathways. Like elephants in modern savannas, Arthropleura's movements reshaped the environment around it. Predators, too, were influenced by its presence. Large amphibians lurking near water may have waited for Arthropleura to pass, knowing that its movement disturbed hidden prey. When it advanced through the undergrowth, smaller creatures scattered, and opportunistic hunters seized the chaos it caused. Arthropleura did not just feed itself, it fed the ecosystem indirectly. Its armored body provided another resource, shelter. When Arthropleura molted, shedding its old exoskeleton, the discarded plates may have lingered for weeks. Smaller creatures could hide beneath them, using the curved armor as a shield from predators. Even in absence, Arthropleura left gifts for other forms of life. Its ecological role was magnified by the high oxygen atmosphere. With so much available, decomposition was rampant, and forests grew quickly, dying just as fast. Arthropleura thrived in this cycle, consuming the constant rain of plant matter and keeping the ground from suffocating under layers of debris. Without it, the balance of the swamp might have tipped into stagnation. Competition also shaped its world. Arthropleura shared the forest with countless insects, from cockroach-like blattheads to giant dragonflies. All of them depended on the same decaying vegetation. Its size gave Arthropleura the advantage. Smaller invertebrates scattered before it, leaving the richest mats of leaves for the giant to consume. But its dominance was not complete. Seasonal changes in climate meant shifts in vegetation, droughts that dried the swamps, or floods that drowned entire forests. In these times, Arthropleura's dependence on moisture may have turned from advantage to weakness. Where smaller insects could fly or burrow, the giant centipede had no escape. Even so, its presence echoed everywhere in the Carboniferous forest. The smell of disturbed earth, the vibration of hundreds of legs, the glimmer of sunlight on armor, all marked its passage. For millions of years, Arthropleura was not simply part of the ecosystem. It was the heartbeat of the forest floor, both shaping and reflecting the strange, fertile world it inhabited. In modern terms, Arthropleura can be seen as a keystone species of its environment. Its actions rippled through the web of life, influencing plants, predators, scavengers, and decomposers alike. Without it, the Carboniferous floor would have been quieter, slower, and less dynamic. With it, the forest pulsed with movement, forever marked by the march of the armored giant. Among all the wonders of the Carboniferous, nothing astonishes scientists more than the sheer size of Arthropleura. Modern centipedes and millipedes rarely exceed a few dozen centimeters, yet this ancient giant stretched more than 2.5 meters. Why did the Earth of 300 million years ago produce such monstrous arthropods? The answer lies in a combination of atmosphere, environment, and evolution. The first and most important factor was oxygen. During the Carboniferous, Earth's atmosphere held up to 35% oxygen, far more than today's 21%. Arthropods do not breathe with lungs, but with tiny tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. Higher oxygen meant these tubes could supply much larger bodies, removing the limits that restrict modern invertebrates. Arthropleura could grow enormous without suffocating under its own weight. Second was the abundance of food. The swampy forests constantly shed vegetation, covering the ground with layers of ferns, mosses, and decaying wood. For a slow-moving giant, this was paradise. Arthropleura had access to an endless buffet of litter, allowing its body to sustain the caloric demands of gigantism. Without this excess, its bulk would have been impossible. The lack of competition also played a role. Dinosaurs had not yet evolved, and large reptiles were still in their infancy. Predators on land were mostly amphibians, formidable in water but less effective on dry ground. This left ecological space for arthropods to expand into niches that would later be occupied by vertebrates. Arthropleura could dominate without facing rivals of equal scale. Its armor gave it another evolutionary advantage. Covered in heavy plates, it could deter attacks from most contemporary predators. The cost of challenging such a giant outweighed the benefit. In evolution, size itself becomes a shield, and Arthropleura wore that shield with every step. Climate also supported its growth. The Carboniferous was warm, humid, and rich in wetlands. Moisture prevented desiccation, which is fatal for modern millipedes. With constant water available, Arthropleura's vast surface area was less of a liability, allowing its size to flourish. Still, gigantism carried risks. A body that massive required tremendous energy and restricted mobility. If food became scarce or conditions dried, survival became precarious. Gigantism is always a gamble. It grants dominance in good times but magnifies vulnerability in bad ones. Arthropleura embodied this gamble perfectly. Its size remains unique because it marks a biological limit. After oxygen levels fell at the end of the Carboniferous, no arthropod ever reached such proportions again. The Earth changed, and with it, the ceiling of what evolution could build. Arthropleura's colossal form was both a triumph and a dead end, possible only under the extraordinary conditions of its time. To us, its size is a symbol of nature's extremes. It reminds us that life is not fixed but fluid, expanding and contracting under the forces of climate and chemistry. Arthropleura was not simply big. It was a living monument to an atmosphere that no longer exists, a giant born of a world lost to time. The story of Arthropleura is not told through complete skeletons, but through the tracks it left behind. Unlike vertebrates, whose bones can fossilize into recognizable forms, arthropods shed their exoskeletons and often decay too quickly for preservation. What survives are impressions in ancient mud, pressed down by hundreds of legs marching in unison, later hardened into stone. These trackways are among the most dramatic fossil evidence of any prehistoric invertebrate. Some stretch for meters, wide enough that a grown human could stand within them. Each track preserves a pattern of leg marks, tiny claw impressions, aligned with uncanny precision. To walk alongside one is to retrace the path of a creature that once dominated the forest floor. One of the most famous discoveries came from Scotland, where researchers uncovered a vast slab of sandstone etched with a fossilized pathway. The trackway measured nearly 90 centimeters across, indicating a creature over 2 meters in length. The regularity of the impressions revealed a methodical wave-like stride, hundreds of legs rising and falling in perfect sequence. Germany has also yielded remarkable evidence. In the Ruhr Valley, slabs of ancient coal-bearing rock preserve not just fragments of Arthropleura's armor, but the trails of its passage through swamp mud. In some cases, the claws of individual legs can still be seen, sharp and distinct, despite 300 million years of burial. These fossils provide more than size. They bring motion back to life. The sheer width and depth of the tracks confirm its colossal weight. Where other creatures left shallow impressions, Arthropleura pressed deeply, as if the earth itself bent beneath its passing. Some trackways show slight dragging marks, perhaps from its armored plates brushing against the ground, adding eerie realism to the fossilized trail. Trackways also raise tantalizing questions about behavior. In some sites, parallel tracks appear side by side, as though multiple Arthropleura walked together. Was this coincidence? Different individuals crossing the same ground at different times? Or could it hint at social behavior? Silent caravans of armored giants moving together through the swamp. The stone cannot answer, but it invites speculation. The first scientific descriptions of Arthropleura date back to the 19th century, when early paleontologists puzzled over enormous arthropod fragments pulled from coal mines. At a time when giant insects seemed the stuff of myth, the idea of an 8-foot millipede astonished the scientific world. The name Arthropleura, meaning jointed ribs, was chosen to reflect its armored body, built from repeating plates. Over time, every new fossil has expanded our understanding. From scattered plates to entire trackways, each discovery paints the picture of a creature larger and stranger than anything alive today. Yet the absence of a complete specimen leaves an aura of mystery, a silhouette we can only fill with imagination. These discoveries also remind us of the ephemeral nature of evidence. For every track preserved, countless others vanished under erosion, buried forever in layers of stone. What we see today is a tiny fraction of what once existed, a handful of preserved moments in a reign that lasted millions of years. And yet, these fleeting traces are enough. They tell us that Arthropleura was real, that it moved, that it dominated. To stand before a fossilized trackway is to feel its presence, still. The whisper of countless legs, the weight of a body like a living wall. The echo of a march that shook the forests of the Carboniferous. Although Arthropleura was the undisputed giant of the forest floor, it did not live in isolation. The Carboniferous swamps teemed with life, and each creature carved out its own role in the tangled web of the ecosystem. For Arthropleura, rivals and threats came not only from predators, but also from competitors that shared its food, its space, and its world. Among its most formidable contemporaries were the giant amphibians. Species such as Anthracosaurus and Eogyrinus could reach lengths of 3 to 4 meters, with broad crocodile-like skulls armed with sharp teeth. These creatures lurked in rivers and pools, ambushing anything that ventured too close to the water's edge. While they may not have actively hunted adult Arthropleura, the smaller or juvenile individuals could have fallen prey to such opportunists. On the forest floor, Arthropleura also shared its space with a multitude of giant insects. The dragonfly-like Meganeura, with wingspans nearing 70 centimeters, dominated the skies. They preyed on other insects and amphibians, swooping down like hawks over the swamp. While they posed no direct threat to Arthropleura, they competed indirectly by hunting smaller animals that might otherwise have shared the ground litter ecosystem. Cockroach-like insects, blattids, and countless beetle ancestors thrived in the Carboniferous, scuttling among the leaf litter that Arthropleura consumed. These smaller arthropods competed for the same decaying vegetation and rotting wood. Yet in the presence of the giant millipede, they likely yielded ground, scattering from its path as it advanced, leaving the richest mats of food for the armored giant. Another fascinating rival was the early reptile. Primitive species such as Hylonomus, among the first true reptiles, emerged during the Carboniferous. These small, agile creatures laid eggs on land, escaping dependence on water for reproduction. While far too small to challenge Arthropleura directly, their rise signaled the dawn of vertebrate competitors that would one day dominate the niches once held by giants like Arthropleura. Environmental rivals were just as dangerous as animal ones. Seasonal droughts could shrink the swamps, reducing the damp habitats on which Arthropleura depended. During these times, competition for moist refuges would have intensified, forcing the giant arthropod to compete with amphibians and other invertebrates for the last surviving patches of humidity. In this way, climate itself was a rival, always testing the limits of its survival. Despite these challenges, Arthropleura's sheer size made it a creature few dared to confront directly. Predators preferred easier prey, and competitors scattered before its armored advance. Yet its dominance was never absolute. The Carboniferous forests were alive with countless interactions, and even the largest giant had to coexist within a crowded, complex web of life. In truth, Arthropleura's greatest rival may not have been another animal at all, but time itself. Evolution was relentless, producing new forms that chipped away at the dominance of older giants. As amphibians grew larger and reptiles more adaptable, the rule of the giant arthropod began to wane. For the moment, however, it remained a colossus among lesser creatures, a ruler whose only true equal was the forest itself. For millions of years, Arthropleura crawled unchallenged across the swampy forests of the Carboniferous. It was the largest land arthropod in history, a living monument to oxygen-rich air and lush vegetation. But no rain lasts forever. The very conditions that allowed Arthropleura to flourish would also set the stage for its decline. The first blow came from climate change. Toward the end of the Carboniferous, the Earth's climate shifted dramatically. Swamps that had stretched for hundreds of miles began to dry. Forests shrank, and vast peat bogs collapsed, transforming into drier landscapes. The once endless supply of damp vegetation that fed Arthropleura dwindled, fragmenting its habitat into isolated pockets. Equally devastating was the drop in atmospheric oxygen. From a high of 35%, oxygen levels began to fall toward modern levels. For small animals, this change was survivable, but for a giant invertebrate dependent on tracheal breathing, it was catastrophic. Arthropleura's colossal body, once sustained by oxygen-rich air, suddenly became a burden it could no longer support. As the environment changed, so too did the creatures within it. Amphibians declined, replaced by the first true reptiles, which laid eggs on dry land and could survive far from the swamps. These early reptiles were smaller, faster, and more adaptable than the amphibians and invertebrates that had come before. Arthropleura, tied to moisture and scale, could not match their resilience. Competition intensified as ecosystems shifted. Smaller arthropods, less dependent on constant humidity, began to thrive. What had once been an advantage, immense size, turned into a liability. Arthropleura required enormous amounts of food and water, and in a world of shrinking swamps, abundance gave way to scarcity. Predators may also have grown bolder as the giant weakened. While few creatures could threaten a fully grown Arthropleura at its peak, younger individuals were always vulnerable. In an increasingly competitive world, even small reptiles or amphibians may have fed on its young, keeping the giant from replenishing its numbers. The decline of Arthropleura was not a single event, but a slow erosion of dominance. For millions of years, its range shrank, its populations thinned, and its presence faded from the fossil record. No catastrophic disaster marked its end, just the steady grinding of evolution, climate, and competition closing in. By the early Permian, the forests that once fed Arthropleura were gone, replaced by drier, more open landscapes. The oxygen that once fueled its body had dropped too low to sustain such scale, and so the giant disappeared, leaving behind only fragments of armor and the ghostly trails of its march. Its extinction was not a failure, but a transition. The fall of Arthropleura cleared the way for reptiles and eventually dinosaurs to claim the land. What had once been ruled by armored giants became the stage for a new caste of creatures, each adapted to the harsher, drier world to come. Today, its absence reminds us of the fragility of gigantism. To grow so large is to depend on extraordinary conditions, and when those conditions vanish, so too must the giants. Arthropleura was both a triumph of evolution and a warning that even the greatest rulers of the forest can be undone by the turning of time. Though Arthropleura vanished over 300 million years ago, its memory has endured, not in living forests, but in human imagination. When paleontologists first uncovered its vast trackways in the 19th century, the scientific world was stunned. The idea of an 8-foot millipede crawling through ancient swamps sounded more like nightmare than natural history. From that moment, Arthropleura was transformed into a symbol of prehistoric terror. In museums, its legacy takes form in casts and reconstructions. Visitors stand before life-sized models, often stretching across entire exhibition halls. Children gaze upward at the armored crawler, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. For many, this is their first encounter with the truth that Earth's past held monsters stranger than any myth. The preserved trackways displayed in Scottish and German collections are especially powerful. Stone slabs, etched with the rhythm of hundreds of legs, a frozen memory of motion. Popular media has also embraced Arthropleura. Documentaries often feature it crawling across misty forests, its armor gleaming beneath shafts of light. Computer-generated recreations bring it to life with unsettling realism, showing the ripple of its endless legs and the shimmer of its plates. In television specials, it is often cast as a predator, lunging at small amphibians or scaring off rivals, an interpretation fueled more by imagination than fossil certainty, but one that grips audiences nonetheless. Fiction has taken even greater liberties. In films, novels, and video games, Arthropleura appears as a monster scaled up beyond reality, sometimes portrayed as a venomous killer, sometimes as a near-mythical guardian of primeval forests. Audiences are less concerned with accuracy than with the raw shock of a centipede the size of a car. These depictions reveal how easily the line between science and story blurs when faced with such an alien creature. Even outside of entertainment, Arthropleura inspires art. Illustrators and paleoartists recreate its form in surreal landscapes, highlighting the strangeness of the Carboniferous world. Paintings show it gliding through fern cathedrals or confronting giant dragonflies beneath a canopy of moss. Digital artists experiment with stylization, exaggerating its armored ridges or glowing its eyes to amplify the sense of menace. Each piece adds another layer to the myth. Its presence in culture speaks to something deeper. Arthropleura fascinates us not only because of its size, but because it is familiar, yet alien. We recognize the shape of a centipede, a creature many already find unsettling. But stretched to impossible scale, armored like a tank, it becomes an emblem of primal fear, a reminder that evolution once produced a crawling giant beyond comprehension. Arthropleura's legacy also resonates with our anxieties about scale and survival. It embodies the question, what if the smallest creatures we know today were once rulers of the earth? In this way, it becomes a metaphor for nature's unpredictability, a symbol of power hidden in forms we often overlook. In classrooms, documentaries, and imaginations, Arthropleura remains alive. Its fossils are static, its body long vanished, but its story continues to crawl through human culture. The armored giant has become more than a prehistoric fact. It is a creature of legend, an icon of both science and storytelling, forever bridging the line between reality and nightmare. Despite more than a century of study, Arthropleura remains wrapped in mystery. Fossils have given us glimpses of its size, its armor, and its movement, but the full picture is still hidden in stone. For every answer paleontology provides, new questions rise, reminding us how much of Earth's history is still cloaked in silence. The greatest puzzle lies in its head and mouth parts. No complete skull has ever been found. Without jaws or mandibles preserved, scientists are left to speculate. Was Arthropleura a peaceful herbivore, feeding quietly on rotting plants, or an omnivore with the ability to snap up small prey? This absence fuels endless debate, dividing experts into camps that argue with equal passion, yet equal uncertainty. Another mystery is its eyes and senses. Did Arthropleura see its world with compound eyes, like insects today? Or did it rely more on antennae sweeping through the forest litter? Trackways suggest purposeful movement, not blind wandering. But without fossil evidence, we cannot know how it navigated the dense, shadowy swamps of the Carboniferous. The question of social behavior is equally tantalizing. Some trackways appear side by side, as if multiple individuals walked together. Were these separate creatures crossing the same ground at different times, or a caravan of armored giants moving in silent procession? If the latter is true, the idea of dozens of Arthropleura traveling as a group transforms it from a solitary crawler into an unstoppable force of nature. Even its dietary role remains uncertain. Chemical analysis of ancient soils hints that it fed largely on decaying vegetation. Yet the possibility of opportunistic carnivory lingers, supported by its size and dominance. Could such a massive body have survived solely on rotting ferns and moss? Or did it need protein from unfortunate amphibians caught in its path? Without mouth fossils, the question may never be fully resolved. The details of its reproduction are also lost. Did Arthropleura lay eggs like its millipede relatives? If so, where were they hidden? Did it guard its young or leave them to fend for themselves in the dangerous swamps? The lack of juvenile fossils leaves this stage of its life cycle a blank chapter. Even the texture and color of its armor remain open to speculation. Was it glossy and black, gleaming like polished obsidian in the swamp light? Or rough and matte, camouflaged against the forest floor? Artists imagine both, but the truth is hidden, locked away in fragments that preserve shape but not shade. These mysteries remind us that science is not always about answers, but about questions that inspire wonder. Arthropleura's silence invites imagination. Each missing piece becomes an opening for curiosity, a chance to ask how creatures once lived, when the world itself was so alien. In the end, the unanswered questions are part of its power. We may never know exactly how Arthropleura saw, ate, or lived, but perhaps that is fitting. The giant centipede remains both fact and enigma, an armored shadow crawling across the border between knowledge and myth. The story of Arthropleura is not just about a giant insect-like creature from a forgotten world. It is also a reminder of how life on Earth is shaped by forces far beyond individual species. Climate, oxygen, competition. These invisible hands sculpt the living and decide which forms can exist. Arthropleura was possible only because of a unique balance of conditions, a moment in time when the rules of life bent to allow giants to crawl. Its size teaches us about the power of environment. With oxygen levels at 35%, arthropods could grow beyond modern limits. When those levels fell, the giants vanished. This connection shows how delicate the relationship is between life and atmosphere. Change the air, and you change the possibilities of evolution itself. Arthropleura's reign reminds us that ecosystems are not static. They are experiments running under the laws of chemistry and climate. Its fall also illustrates the limits of dominance. For millions of years, Arthropleura towered over the forest floor, seemingly untouchable. Yet it was not a predator, not invincible, and not eternal. When the swamps dried and the air thinned, its advantage dissolved. Evolution teaches that even the greatest forms cannot escape change. Strength in one age can become weakness in the next. In a broader sense, Arthropleura's story invites humility. We often see the present world as stable, as though the creatures we know define the boundaries of what is possible. But the fossil record says otherwise. Once, dragonflies were the size of hawks, amphibians the size of crocodiles, and millipedes longer than men. What seems impossible today was reality yesterday. Nature is never finished rewriting its rules. Arthropleura also serves as a symbol of fear and fascination. Many people recoil at the sight of centipedes, yet the thought of one stretching 8 feet long captures imaginations across cultures. Its legacy shows how easily familiarity can become alien when magnified, and how primal our responses remain to shapes that scuttle and crawl. In this way, Arthropleura is both monster and teacher, an emblem of how evolution plays with scale. Most importantly, it is a reminder of the fragility of giants. Gigantism is always a gamble. It works when resources are plenty and conditions are favorable, but it collapses when the world shifts. Today's ecosystems may one day favor giants again, or they may favor small, adaptable survivors. The only constant is change, and survival belongs to those who can adjust. In the end, Arthropleura is not just a fossil. It is a chapter in the story of life, a creature that pushed the boundaries of what an arthropod could be. Its armored plates, its endless legs, its colossal tracks carved into mud. All are echoes of a time when the earth itself breathed differently. And in those echoes lies a lesson. The world we know is only temporary, and the monsters of the past remind us that evolution's imagination is greater than our own.